Welcome. Happy Monday, everyone. So as everyone is coming on, we will just stare blankly at all of you for just a few minutes while we're waiting for everyone to arrive. Hope everyone had a nice weekend. For those of you not in Omaha, we got some rain this morning. It was very pleasant. The plants needed it, and probably some people with allergies appreciated the rain. All right. Rabbi Yoni, how quickly do people normally join you on your average Monday?
That's a question for Mark.
Mark knows. Mark knows all. Mark, you're muted.
Typically about 5 minutes or so after the start time, then you've got the bulk of people on.
All right, so I'll get us, I don't want to cut people off that are planning on joining us, but I do like starting things on time. And I thank those of you who have arrived. So I will do some formal introductions, and hopefully that will take up all of the waiting time so that once the actual presenters are speaking, it is a full class. So
Jenny, just don't forget Zion Israel. It's supposed to be a class about Israel. In Israel, no one's on time, so it's fine.
Well, that's true. Of course, it wouldn't be a class on Israel if it wasn't a slightly delayed. You're correct. So for those of you who don't know me, I am Jenny Gates Beckman. I'm the Director of Community Engagement and Education at the Jewish Federation of Omaha. And today is a very special Eye on Israel. Not only do we have Rabbi Yoni Dreyer, who normally leads this excellent monthly program, but we also have today our JFO CEO, Alan Potash, and senior contributing editor and analyst with the Jerusalem Post, Herb Keinon. So we had started this discussion about the elections in Israel back in March. And if you weren't able to join us for that session, it is on the JFO YouTube channel, so you can go back and watch that. But today we are joining forces with Eye on Israel so that we can talk more, because really, who doesn't want more Israeli elections? But obviously there's greater context. There's always something to talk about when we're talking current events in Israel. And so I'm going to turn it over to Rabbi Yoni for beginning our time together. I also want to invite people. I know we're in a meeting format, so we can see you, but we're also going to encourage people to use the chat to submit questions as we go along, and I'll help facilitate question and answer later on in the session. So excited for everyone to be joining us.
Thank you, Jenny.
Yeah, sorry, Alan.
No, I just wanted to say thank you. So Rabbi Dreyer, it's your program. You take the lead here.
Shalom lekulam, welcome, and thank you for joining. 449 years ago, last Friday, passed away a great rabbi. His name is Rabbi Moshe Isserlich, well known as the Rama. The Rama's entire life worked on a very, very important book that he wanted to publicize. A book that's supposed to gather together all the halacha, all the rules, all the Jewish halacha that we have We're doing it on a daily basis. And he worked really hard for many years in order to create this book. One day, the Rama had a guest that came over from Israel, from a city called Tzfat. And after they had supper and they talked, the guest took out a book and gave it as a gift to Rabbi Moshe. And when the Rama opened this book, he saw a beautiful, fascinating book. Today we all know that book is the Shulchan Aruch. That wrote Rabbi Yosef Karo wrote in Tzfat. And when he went over the book, he saw that Rabbi Yosef Karo wrote the exactly same book that he wanted to publicize, a book that he worked on for many, many years. And he saw that Rabbi Yosef Karo publicized his book before the Rama was able to publicize his. So now the Rama had two options, two ways to act. One was to give up all his hard work, all the hard things that he did for many, many years, and to just to try maybe to find a new project to work on. The second is to say, okay, Rabbi Yosef Karo, Abet Yosef, publicized this great book, really good book, but he's a Sephardi Jew. I'm an Ashkenazi Jew, so I can still publicize my book and still have enough people to read my book, and that will be fine. So of course, Rabbi Moshe Easterlish, like a Jew, picked the third option. He decided to take the Shulchan Aruch and just to go over it and add his opinions, his point of view, his Ashkenazi halachot into that book. And why did he did so? He did so because he understood that if he will publicize his book, he accidentally can create something very, very scary in the Jewish nation. He can divide the Jewish nation into two groups: the Sephardi group that goes by the Bet Yosef, the Shulchan Aruch, and the Ashkenazi that go by the Rama. And by adding his halachot, his rules, his laws into the book of the Shulchan Aruch, he gave us today the main book that we all use is a guideline, one book for the entire Jewish nation. He picked the idea of uniting the entire Jewish nation. And why am I telling you this story today? Because we all heard about what happened a few days ago on Lag BaOmer in Meron. And right after it happened, we were in the middle of celebrating here Lag BaOmer at the shul, the synagogue here. And I believe that when something bad happens, I want to be the person that tells my kids what happened. I don't want them to hear it from someone else. So I told my family what happened, and my daughter, she's 7 years old, right away asked, Abba, what is Hashem trying to teach us with that? Why did it happen? And I told her, listen, I really don't know. I really don't know why it happened. But afterwards, that entire night, it was really hard for me to sleep. My brother-in-law was there in Meron, and he didn't answer until it was 6 o'clock in the morning in Israel. So that night I sat and tried to think what exactly Hashem, God, is trying to teach us from what happened there in Meron. And I think that today in Israel, in the past 2 years, we had 4 elections. What's going on today in Israel, if you're following the news, you see that there are terror attacks, that there are a lot of disunited in the Jewish nation. And we talked already in the past on Eye on Israel that in the past, in the Jewish history, I'm a big believer of history, we had only twice united government or a Jewish government, a Jewish state in the land of Israel. And both of them were around only for 73 years. Happens to be that we also today in the 73rd year of the Jewish state, of the Israeli state. And both times in the past, what caused the broken up, I don't know to call it in English, of the Jewish state was that we weren't united. And I think it's really, really relevant to the topic that we were trying to talk today, because I think that happened to be that in the history, in the past, it's easier for us to get together, to get united over something bad that happens, over a tragedy that happens. And maybe Hashem is trying to teach us, and again, I don't know, but maybe Hashem is trying to show us that this is the time that we need to be more united, that we need to try to work together, to deal together, to try to create this government, because we all know that there's no in the book of Shoftim, it says that En melech b'Yisrael ish yashar b'einav yaseh, when there's no leader, when there's no government, there's no something to someone to lead, so a lot of bad things happened. And today, if you follow the news, you can hear that in Israel, Jews get attacked in cities like Yafo, like Lod, like even in the Jewish capital, the Israeli capital in Jerusalem, they're getting attacked only because they are Jewish, something that's not supposed to happen in Israel. And the government is the one that's supposed to deal with that and take care of that won't happen. So before we dive in the politics and to talk a little bit of what's going on in the government in Israel today, I really think that we all need to try to be more united. And it's relevant to each one of us. We can't blame only the people that's sitting in the parties and the Knesset or whatever. It's about all of us, about each one of us, to try and be more and more united. Not only when bad things happen. And I really want to send from here big refuah shlema to all of those that were injured, and to pray for all those that were killed in that tragedy that happened in Meron. And now I think when that's said, I think we should start talking about politics and try to focus maybe from a better point of view, and try to see how we can help, how we can maybe advise from here, how to work more together in order that we won't go to another elections in Israel. Thank you.
Rabbi Dreyer, thank you for that opening. I'm going to turn it over to Herb in a second, but I think that your idea about unifying people, many people are talking about how Israel is really good at unifying when there's a tragedy. I'm not quite sure that'll flow over into the elections, but I think that every day is a political day in Israel, and every day is an opportunity to bring people together. And with that, I'm going to let Herb kind of talk a little bit about from Israel, the scope of how he sees things. And then if you didn't read his piece yesterday, I'd recommend taking a look at it when he talks about personal space and how it ties into the timing of what happened. So Herb, welcome back to Omaha, even though you're sitting in Ma'ale Adumim, but it's great to have you back.
Thank you. Thank you. We could use some of that rain over here. It's getting hot. Look, I just want to touch on what Rabbi Dreyer said a little bit about the whole unity thing. What's interesting, there was a video out there today of a woman from Venezuela. I think somehow she was connected to the events that were happening in Meron, and she said, she comes from Venezuela, and in Venezuela, the Jewish community is united, and she comes to Israel, and she's very disheartened by the fact that the Jewish community isn't united. Well, she's right, but it's easy to be united when you're a community of 10,000 people. But when you have a community of 6.8 million people, which is what we have here now, we have 6.8 million Jews, it's going to be very difficult to find that sense of unity. And I think we have to be realistic about that. Also, some people, Rabbi Dreyer alluded to this and said, we unite in tragedy, we unite in death, we don't always unite in life. That's true, but at least we unite in death. And I think there's some solace in that. You have a situation where, as Alan said, the country is divided. The president, Reuven Rivlin, has been talking for the last number of years about how the country's divided into different tribes. He mentioned 4 tribes: the secular, the religious Zionists, the ultra-Orthodox, the Haredim, and the Arab sector. There's more tribes than that. You have the Russian speakers, you have the Masortim, but this whole idea that Israel's divided into tribes, which can be kind of problematic because we like to see ourselves as one people. How does it work with the tribes? And something that I took a little comfort from over the Lag BaOmer thing was when I first heard on the news about what happened, and I heard that it happened at the tent that belonged to what's called Toldot Aharon, which is the most anti-Zionist Hasidic, so one of the most anti-Zionist Hasidic sects in Israel. And you heard on the news that most of the people who were killed there were ultra-Orthodox. I had a little bit of a concern that, well, people are going to say, well, you know what? It's not our tragedy. It's the Haredi. You know, I don't go to Meron. It's the Haredim. They're not really a part of us. They don't like to stay, whatever. And one thing that I was pleasantly surprised about was how this thing turned into a national tragedy. The prime minister declared this a day of national mourning on Sunday, right? The flag was at half mast, a flag which some of those, maybe 1 or 2 of the victims who died there don't even recognize the state that stands behind the flag. But there was a real sense that this was a national tragedy. There was a presenter on the radio, a very cynical presenter, whose voice started to crack up once you started to read the names and the ages and the place of residence of the people who died. So there was a sense that this was everybody's tragedy. And that is something that I think speaks very very loudly and about Israel, even at this time of division, that there are, I called it this morning, there's kind of this mystic bind of brotherhood that you have here and that you felt during this tragedy, which hit really one tribe, but everybody felt it. Now, can you take that forward? I mean, obviously, the country has a history of uniting in times of tragedies. Then reality gets in the way and you forget that moment of great unity, but at least we have that unity there. And I think that's important. And I don't think we should underplay it or underestimate it. That being said, at a political level, it's had no impact, right? It hasn't changed the posturing of the parties as Netanyahu tries to form a coalition. Let me just give you a quick rundown of where we are right now, right? It's Monday night over here. Tomorrow at midnight, Netanyahu's Prime Minister Netanyahu's 4 weeks of being able to set up a coalition, that period ends, right? He can ask for another extension of another 14 days. Not sure he's going to do it. Right now, Netanyahu doesn't have a government, right? Right now, he doesn't have a government. He was hoping that the religious Zionist party would be willing to accept a government that's going to be supported by an Arab party on the outside, but they said today they wouldn't. So his chances of forming a government now in the remaining 28 hours before the deadline are very slim. So then what happens? Then what happens? 2 things could happen. Number one, the president could, which is probably what's going to happen, give the mandate to form a government to Yair Lapid, Netanyahu's rival from the centrist Yesh Atid party. He'll have 28 days to try to form a government. Not clear if he can do it either, right? He doesn't have the numbers. You need 61 to form a coalition. He doesn't necessarily have those numbers now either, right? If he can't do it after 28 hours, the president can throw it back into the Knesset, and the Knesset will have then 21 days to kind of agree on one person to be prime minister. If that person can get 61 seats, then we finally have a prime minister. If that doesn't happen, and this takes us all to July, the middle of July, if that doesn't happen by the middle of July, the Knesset dissolves itself, right? And we go back to elections in 3 months' time. So we conceivably could face an election, a 5th election in September. It all depends. Naftali Bennett from the Yamina party is a big kingmaker here. Is he going to be willing to go with Lapid? You ask me what's going to happen. At this point in time, nobody really knows what's going to happen. Nobody really knows what's going to happen. It's still very much up in the air. And it's tough. It's a tough situation because as we saw over the last 2 weeks, things are happening, right? You had a kind of an outburst of violence on the streets as Ramadan came. The Muslim month of Ramadan it's historically a month of an uptick in terror in Israel. The Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, the president, he canceled their elections. Hamas is angry about that. They want to stick it to Mahmoud to Abu Mazen, to Mahmoud Abbas. How do they do that? They do terror in Israel, which we saw yesterday. So things are tense. Things are tense. We need a government, to kind of take control of things. You need a government who's able to plan, who can pass a budget, who can appoint ministers, who can deal with Iran, who can deal with the Americans. This is not a healthy situation we're in right now. Hopefully, they'll find a way to form a government because, again, even if we go to a fifth election, right? Think about it for a minute. We've had 4 elections. People aren't really changing their vote from one block to the next block. It's not like somebody who voted for the right-wing Yamina party is going to say all of a sudden, oh, you know what? I'm wrong. I'm going to go vote for the left-wing Meretz party. People, the voting patterns are going to stay pretty much the same. So there's no reason to think that if you go to even a fifth election, you're going to find a way out of this, which is kind of problematic. So there's 2 ways out. Number one is that the parties drop some of their campaign pledges, right? Those who said they won't sit with Netanyahu, maybe sit with Netanyahu and form a government. Or another option would be for the Likud to move Netanyahu to the side or for Netanyahu to resign. That's very unlikely to happen. That's very unlikely to happen. So we're at this point in time, again, 28 hours before the deadline, we seem to be as stuck as we were 4 weeks ago.
So
Alan, let me send that back to you, and then we'll, take the conversation,
So
where you want it to go.
I want to just ask a quick question, and then I'll let Rabbi Dreyer also pop in. So what we've been seeing in the media, in the news, is all this jockeying for prime ministerships. So Netanyahu has been trying to find somebody to be a partner with him, giving him some opportunities, but he had that opportunity with Gantz, and he kind of pushed Gantz aside. And then you've got Lapid and Bennett talking to each other about having prime ministerships. Is that a real option for Israel? Has that worked before in the past? And is that a way to build a unity government?
Look, there was one time in Israeli history where we had this. It was with Shimon Peres and Yitzhak Shamir in the 80s. It worked well, but there was a huge difference there. And the difference there was you had 2 parties which were big parties. I think Labor and the Peres had 44 seats at the time, and Shamir had 43. And they were comparable, right? They were comparable parties. Here, you're talking about a rotation. The whole political map has shifted in this country. You have one big party, right? Likud with 30. And then you have a middle-sized party, which is Lapid with 17. And then you got a bunch of not tiny, but you have small parties with 8 and 7 seats. So you have a situation where they're talking about Naftali Bennett being the prime minister. Naftali Bennett won 7 seats. He won 235,000 votes out of 4.4 million cast, right? What kind of legitimacy does he have to be the prime minister? You say that, Netanyahu, rightfully you said this, Netanyahu is looking for people, he'll rotate with them. Netanyahu's problem right now is he has a credibility gap, right? Because he said he was going to do this with Gantz and he didn't. So, who's going to buy that used car again? So he's now saying to Naftali Bennett, Naftali, come on board and I'll make you the prime minister for the first year. You can start the rotation. But again, I think because of his track record of kind of going back on his promise to Benny Gantz, that's not, a lot of people aren't looking real favorably at that option. The other option is on the other side in the anti-Bibi camp. And again, they call it the change camp, which is kind of, a clever use of words. This country, as we used to know, was divided between right and left, right? The fault line was the Palestinian issue, the settlements, the territories. Right now, the country is divided in 2 but the fault line is one person, and his name is Netanyahu, right? That's the fault line. So on the other side, in the anti-Bibi camp, they're talking about a coalition made up of the right-wing anti-Bibi parties, Gidon Sar, Avigdor Lieberman, Naftali Bennett, perhaps, Lapid in the middle, and left-wing parties. There's no glue that cements that party, that government together outside of a distaste for Netanyahu and a desire to remove him from office. So let's say you do remove him from office, and let's say you have a rotation government. How's it going to work, right? I mean, there's huge ideological differences between Meretz on the left and Avigdor Lieberman or Gidon Sar on the right. What kind of government is this going to be? That type of government will have one goal, and that goal will remove Netanyahu from office. But a government with such wide distance ideologically, I don't think that its time in office is going to be great, because there's very little else to agree on. Now, they might say, well, we have a historical tafkid, we have historical a job, historical role, and that is to remove Netanyahu. Once we've done that, then we can rule for a year and a half, and then we'll go back to the people for another election, and it'll be a different ball game because Netanyahu will be out of the picture.
Rabbi Dreyer, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, like Herb said, now it can't really work with Yamina sitting together with Meretz. It will never work because it's two definitely sides of the map. And the question I would like to hear what Herb would like to say about it is there is an option, except maybe Gidon Sar getting off the tree that he climbed on and sitting together with Netanyahu, because now if Gidon Sar, and correct me if I'm wrong, if Gidon Sar and Yamina and the Tzionut Datit sit together, including with the Haredim, so they have a coalition, and this is a coalition that can really stand and maybe even finish 4 years. Am I wrong?
Look, Gidon Sar said today, unequivocally, he ain't sit with Netanyahu. He said it unequivocally today, but we'll wait to see what happens tomorrow. But he's I mean, he said that, those who voted for my party voted for the party because they don't want Netanyahu in office. It's nothing personal. We believe that he's no longer suited to be prime minister. Gidon Sar, I'm not going to sit with him. Rabbi Dryman, you're right. If Gidon Sar would join Netanyahu, they would have a strong government of 65 seats, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen. And I think one thing that's interesting to note is everybody is kind of jockeying for the day after Netanyahu, because both Gidon Sar and Naftali Bennett are right wingers, right? And they will want to take over the right once Netanyahu is gone. And the question is, if they form a government with the center, with Lapid and the left, what's that going to do to them, right? How's that going to make them look if afterwards they're going to want to vie for the leadership on the right? And I think that's one thing that Bennett is worried about, right? If because of him, a government, a non-right-wing government, a unity government is formed, when Netanyahu is out of the picture and he then wants to run for the leadership of the right wing, how's that going to redound against him? I think each of these guys are kind of thinking about their next step very much, looking down the road and how they can position themselves to take over from Netanyahu where he's gone. But it makes it difficult. That makes it difficult for Lapid now to form a government, because does Sar or Bennett, do they want to join this type of government? And that's something that then will haunt them after the government falls, after Netanyahu is gone, and they want to become the leader of the right wing. It's a very complicated political situation right now.
I really would like to believe that it's not only a personal decision. Like they're trying to think maybe about the people that voted for them, the other people that live in Israel. It seems like, according to what you say, it's only something personal that each one of them wants to be the next leader, to be to have a, I don't know, a certain position. So that's why the thing, that's the motive that drives them. Don't you think that they came to politics to do something much bigger, and maybe they were willing to maybe give up their dream to be maybe a prime minister, but only just for now to support the Jewish nation?
Look, I think one of the unfortunate things we're seeing right now is that it is all personal, right? I mean, Gideon Sa'ar can say what he wants to say, but it's all personal. There is no difference ideologically between him and Likud, except for a distaste that he has for Netanyahu. Right? And there's many reasons for the distaste he has for Netanyahu. Has to do with the history they have together. Netanyahu didn't give Sa'ar what Sa'ar thought he had coming for him. It's coming to him, but it's all personal. Same thing with Bennett. I mean, Bennett and Sa'ar. You tell me what's the difference between Bennett's party and Sa'ar's party. I can't find a difference. It's not ideological. It's personal. We've entered kind of a post-ideological age in Israeli politics, and I think it's kind of a shame. There used to be days where you had parties, real parties with party apparatus and party platforms. This election wasn't about, Likud didn't even put out a platform this time because it wasn't about policies. It was about one man. It was about Netanyahu. Is Netanyahu a scoundrel or a saint, right? Is he a savior, or is he a guy who's leading the country down the garden path to destruction? That's what the whole thing is about. It's all personal right now. Now, once Netanyahu leaves the scene, hopefully we can go back to some ideological discussions, but we don't have them now. Another interesting thing about this idea that it's not ideological is there's, used to be one of the big ideological debates was, capitalism versus socialism. That's kind of been decided. The Palestinians, that was a big barrier between the right and the left. Right now, most of the people are of the same mind that right now, a two-state solution with the partners you have on the other side, it's not a real viable option. Even those who would like to see a two-state solution realize that right now it's, with what's happening, the separation between Gaza and the West Bank and Hamas and control of Gaza, it's not going to happen. So that deep ideological division isn't, it's not as great as it once was, which leaves you again with the only thing that really divides people right now. Well, two things. Number one is Netanyahu. And another issue that is increasingly starting to divide people, we saw this during the pandemic, was the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox, the relationship between the ultra-Orthodox and the state, the state's inability to kind of impose its authority on all sectors of the country, both the ultra-Orthodox, both the Haredim and the Arabs, right? That's starting to be a major kind of ideological issue. But the main thing, like I said, it's about Bibi. The last 4 elections have been a referendum on Bibi, and until he leaves the scene, I think that's the way it's going to continue to go.
Before we open it up to questions, Jenny, I just want to ask a question. Mansour Abbas was big on the scene about 3 or 4 weeks ago. Has he disappeared? And his motivation for his statement to the Israeli public when he made it, has that had any impact?
Look, Mansour Abbas is the head of the Ram party, the Arab party. He's very much a part of the scene right now. And he's kind of changed the way that many Israelis are looking at Arab involvement in politics. Look, I mean, he's done something. I think he's revolutionized the Arab street, because in the past the Arabs would say, we can only deal with the left, right? We can only deal with those parties who like Meretz and Labor. We're not going to deal with Netanyahu. We're not going to deal with Likud. Now, that was kind of a move that kind of cut off your nose to spite your face, because since 1977, the right wing has been in power for all but maybe six years, right? So if you want things for your community, you deal with who's in power, even if you might not agree with everything they do. And I think it's interesting that one of the reasons why Mansour Abbas has been able to take this new position right now, which is a courageous position, right? I mean, today he came out and he condemned that terror attack yesterday at the Pork Junction in the Shomron in Samaria. The reason he's able to say, I will work even with Netanyahu, even with Likud, is because he looks around and sees what happened in the Arab world, right? The United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, right? They didn't say we can only work with a left-wing Israeli government. They made peace with Netanyahu. They made peace with Netanyahu's Israel. Why? Because it was good for them, because they have what to benefit from it. And that's the same considerations that Mansour Abbas wisely took. He said, look, I need things for my people, my constituents. There's rampant crime in the Arab streets. There's problem with employment, with housing. I need to get things for them. I can't do that if I'm always shouting apartheid, if I'm always on the outside looking in. I need to be around the table. So he's willing to come to the table with the right wing. What's happened, however, is on the far right Zionist camp, right? The party called the Religious Zionists, they're not willing to work with him, right? Because they say he's a supporter. I mean, this is an Islamist party, right? It's an Islamist party. This is a very frum a Muslim party, the Muslim Brotherhood. It's kind of a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. But Mansour Abbas is talking a completely different game. But the ideological, hard right ideological religious Zionists are saying, no, we can't go into a government that is being supported by an Arab party that they claim supports terrorism. So that's and what makes this even more ironic right now is, I don't know if you guys heard about this. I'm sure you did. It was big news here. The Human Rights Watch last week, right? They put out a report saying that Israel has crossed the threshold and it's an apartheid state, right? Now they said this at the exact moment when Mansour Abbas is the guy who could be crowning who's going to be our next prime minister, right? It's kind of ironic how that happened.
So Jenny, you have any questions that are coming through? No? Okay, so Rabbi Dreyer, back to you. No?
I think Herb spoke really nicely.
So I'm going to go off topic a little bit. Yesterday you wrote about the coincidence of the Daf Yomi that you were learning and personal space in a crowd. Do you want to elaborate on that at all, or do a little teaching?
Yeah, I mean, the rabbinics I'll leave to Rabbi Dreyer, but it was kind of it just hit me yesterday when I was studying the Daf Yomi, that they say that in the temple there were 10 miracles. 10 miracles happened in the temple, and one of the miracles that happened in the temple was that people were crowded. They were incredibly crowded when they stood up, but yet when they prostrated themselves, there was plenty of room. They had 4 amot, or 2 meters between them, right? And that could only happen if there was a miracle. And you had 10 miracles in the temple. Our problem in Israel is we have a mentality where we kind of rely on miracles. And I think, anybody who's been to Meron on Lag BaOmer realized that it was an unsustainable situation. There were just too many people in too small an area, right? But because nothing happened ever, right? You think, okay, nothing happened, and this country lives on miracles. And I think, what this is going to do is, it has to inculcate the country with kind of a different attitude. If a rocket had been fired from Gaza into Ashdod, into a Haredi neighborhood in Ashdod, right, and killed 45 people, we would be at war today in Gaza, justifiably so, right? For that kind of loss of life for innocent people, we would be at war in Gaza. The same type of war we need to wage among ourselves to get rid of this attitude that everything will be okay. Don't worry about it. Smoch alai, follow me, nothing will happen. Okay, there's a construction site with a huge hole and no fence, right? Don't worry about it. It'll be okay, right? It won't be okay. It's not always okay. And we have to change that attitude, right? I mean, the country, a place like Meron, Israel's population has doubled in the last 30 years from 1990 until today. Today we have 9.3 million people. 1990, before the big Russian Aliyah, we had about 4.1 million people. It's more than double, but the infrastructure hasn't, Meron hasn't changed in those, to the same, to an appreciable extent in the 30 years, right? We've got to change the mentality. We've, in one thing that, in America, safety on the streets, right? If there's a hole in the street, the construction sites, you take it very seriously. Here, unfortunately, we don't take it seriously enough. The amount of construction accidents that happen all the time, right? We just don't take it seriously enough. Hopefully this will be a wake-up call, and people will realize that, no, it's not all going to be okay. You have to make sure it's okay. Don't rely on miracles. And I think that's something you get from the Daf Yomi, because that worked in the temple, because in the temple time, you had miracles. We're not in the temple time anymore. We can't rely on miracles, and you have to take things into your own hand and take these things which in the past we didn't take as seriously as we needed to, take them much more seriously today.
I would just want to add, if you want to learn a Daf Yomi, you're welcome to join my class every day, 40 minutes prior to Mincha. And second, I can only just add and say that the entire Jewish state is one big miracle. And every day we do see miracles. Like the Gemara says, there were 10, the Mishnah says there were 10 miracles, but then the Gemara mentions that there were many, many other miracles. But the idea of the Mishnah, they didn't say more than 10 miracles, is that these 10 miracles were happening every day, something that we really could have count on. And the rest, I think that either people didn't see, or either you can't really count on them. And this relates to what you said, that you can't really count on miracles to rule a country, and you can't even rely on a magician as Netanyahu, that maybe everything will be all right.
Yeah, look, I agree. The country is one big miracle. I agree. We just had 73 years of Yom Ha'atzmaut. It's a miracle, but you can't rely on them, right? And one of the reasons that the country survived is because it hasn't relied on miracles, right? Because you have this strong idea that you make things happen. That you don't rely on the nets from Shemayim. And just as you don't do that when you defend the state, you also can't do that in the day-to-day running of the state and how things happen on the street.
Jenny has a question, but since we're talking about that piece, I want to just reflect on how one individual is taking some responsibility for what happened, but within that, the challenge that exists within leadership and decision-making in a situation like that. We can have that conversation later, but I just wanted to point out that, one of the people in the region who's responsible for authorizing these types of events realized that it was not right and is holding himself responsible for that, but using the criteria that they've used for large gatherings of up to 15,000 people. If we have time at the end, maybe we can touch on that. Jenny?
So a question from the chat for any one of you is, to what extent do you think politics as personal is becoming a universal trend?
Look, I think, you look at America, the past elections in America, it was very personal. You look at elections in Britain. I think you're seeing it more and more. As many countries are in a post-ideological phase right now. There's not these huge ideological arguments between capitalism and socialism. So I think you're seeing it. I think you're seeing it to a large extent all over.
All right, am I going to have to round up the crowd? Oh, we have something from Bob.
Read that. Go ahead.
Do you believe that electoral reform is possible given the repeated efforts to make a coalition?
Look, every time we've never had this kind of bump in the road, by the way. We've never had anything as serious as this. But every time we do have troubles with the coalition, there's always talking about reforming the system. And we tried that once, right? In the late 90s, early 2000s, Israel went to a situation where you went to the ballot box and you put in 2 ballots. You voted for the party, and then you voted directly for the prime minister. We tried that 3 times. It didn't work. I'm sorry?
And he voted too. Who got elected then?
Bibi was elected and Sharon was elected.
Yeah,
Right?
Bibi again.
But it didn't work. It did empower, and Barack. It was Bibi, Barack, and Sharon, and it didn't give the government any more stability. It's interesting that this is an idea that Netanyahu tried to push a couple of weeks ago. He said, "Okay, we're stuck right now, so let's let the people decide. You say this is a referendum on me. Let's really make this a referendum on me. Let's have a snap, direct election for the prime minister." Now that was a brilliant tactic on his part, because he knows he would win. I mean, he's still, he would win that type of election. So which is why he put it out there. But it's not something that the other people weren't born yesterday. They're not going to agree to it. I'm not sure that the direct elections is gonna change anything right now. I think one of the big things that would help, which is more realistic, and it's kind of, lowering the bar a bit. It's not changing the whole system. Is term limits. I think term limits are very important. Netanyahu right now is being prime minister for more than 15 years. Last 12 of that consecutively. That's a lot of time. Right? This country is only 73 years old. 15 years is just over 20% of the country's history was governed by one man, right? And the next guy, Ben-Gurion, was prime minister for 13 years. So you put those two guys together and they ruled the country about 38% of the country's entire history. I mean, it's, put in American terms, it's having one president for about 50 years, right? It's not healthy, I don't think. I mean, humbly, I don't think it's healthy. I mean, obviously Netanyahu has done tremendous things for the country. You look at where the country was in 2009 when he took over and where it is today, and we're just in a different league. And a lot of that has to be, given. He deserves credit for that. But at the same token, it's not healthy to have one guy in office for so long. And what it also does is it keeps anybody else from sprouting up, right? Netanyahu, not only Netanyahu, Sharon was the same way. They want to be prime minister forever. So if you want to be prime minister forever and there's no term limits, you're not going to groom anybody inside your own party to take over someday. Who's the successor for Netanyahu? We don't know, right? Because he hasn't picked a successor. Because why pick a successor who's going to be your threat, right? Ehud Olmert followed Ariel Sharon. Ariel Sharon didn't pick Ehud Olmert. That was a fluke. Sharon also didn't have a successor because he also thought he could rule forever. I think term limits here would go a long way to kind of solving some of our immediate problems. You wouldn't have one man dominating the scene for so long. My youngest son is 25 years. Okay, he's 25 years old. He doesn't know a prime minister for the most part, except for Bibi Netanyahu. Not sure how healthy that is.
Jenny, there was a follow-up to Bob's question.
I feel it was more like a statement, but I'm happy to share. So the addition was that they studied every electoral reform and chose the worst possible form that was against the advice of the specialists.
So I don't know if you want to answer that, Herb, but I'll throw out a question that kind of came up the other day with the visit by Mossad Levy Cohen
Levy, it's a Jewish guy.
with at the White House with President Biden to talk about Iran. Any thoughts on that?
Yes. Let me just one last thing on the electoral form thing, because I think, look, Israel's system isn't great, but to a certain degree, it fits the country because it gives everybody a sense that they have a stake in it. You have all the different constituencies, the Arabs, the Haredim, right? The religious Zionists, the Russian speakers, they all kind of feel a part of the ball game, which is very important. I remember that when I first came to Israel, one thing that struck me here was the degree to which there was an over-idealization of Israel. I'm sorry, over-idealization of America. And I've been in Israel now for 37 years. But I remember anything that went wrong here, right? If the phone didn't work, or if there was a blackout in your house and you didn't have electricity, you'd say this would never happen in a real country. It never happened in a real country. And the mother of all real countries was America. That was always the model. And the same thing happened during the elections, right? We always have problems with elections, with the coalition building. Whenever that happened, they say, oh, if it was just like in America, if we would just have a system like in America. And then you had the 2016 American elections and the 2020 American elections. And I think that disabused a lot of people here of the idea that it works everywhere else. We're the only dysfunctional democracy, right? Every system has its dysfunctionalities. Unfortunately, we're stuck right now in this one, but you switch systems, it's not necessarily going to solve the problem. As far as Iran, by the way, Yossi Cohen, the head of the Mossad, that's a name you might want to remember because he's a guy who could be an up and coming political wonder. Netanyahu, when you ask Netanyahu who he thinks can succeed him, he mentions two people, or who would be worthy of succeeding him, not who can make it or not, but who he sees as somebody who could succeed him. Two guys he mentions. Number one is Ron Dermer, the former ambassador to the U.S., who doesn't have a chance of making it in Israeli politics because it's just, he's an American immigrant. He's not going to make it. He's not going to rise up that ladder. And the second guy that Netanyahu speaks of is Yossi Cohen. And Yossi Cohen is a guy who actually could make his way into politics and could someday become the prime minister. So he's definitely a guy to watch. He's smart. He's articulate. He's been around. He's had many different positions, right? He speaks English well. He's good looking. He's a guy who could go far politically. So just keep that name in mind. Yossi Cohen, the former head of the Mossad. I'm on his payroll, by the way. So I'm just kidding. The whole thing with Iran is look. It's interesting what's happened with Iran because Biden, President Biden has said during the elections, he said that he wants to go back into the Iranian nuclear deal. And there was a lot of concern here that he was going to go full force into the deal, right? That no matter what the Iranians would do, he would go into the deal. He is very eager to get into it, but he hasn't gone into it as fast as I think some people here were concerned about. One of the problems Israel had with Obama was that we were cut out of the loop, right? Obama started to negotiate with the Iranians in 2013 secretly, right? We didn't know about it. I don't think that's happening now. The very fact that Cohen is in Washington, he met with Blinken, Biden stopped in. They had a discussion. I think we're in the loop. I think we see the problem differently. Right? I mean, we're coming at it from two different, completely different areas. We in Israel, we see Iran as an existential threat, right? Both if they get the nukes, but even if they don't get the nukes and they try to continue with all the mischief they're doing in the region, from what they're trying to do in Syria, from the arc, the Sunni, the Shiite arc that they're trying to bring from Yemen through Iraq, through Lebanon, through Syria to Lebanon. That's something that Israel feels is an existential threat. Israel has said, and I actually believe them, is not going to allow the Iranians to get a nuclear weapon. Now, I think the problem conceptually some people have with this idea is because of how Israel operated against the Iraqi nuclear reactor in 1981 and the Syrian nuclear reactor in 2008, they think, or 2007, they think that in order for Israel to knock out the Iranian nukes, the planes have to come from the northwest and they're going to blow it up. That doesn't necessarily have to be the way it works. I think if you look at the history here, the Iranians have been trying to get a nuclear weapon since the mid-1980s in the midst of the Iranian-Iraqi war. Right? That's when they made the decision to go after nukes. And believe me, there are smart, capable people. The fact that they haven't gotten there is not because they're not as smart as we are, or the Indians or the Pakistanis. It's because things have happened on the ground to keep them from getting there, right? And you've seen things happen on the ground in the last couple of months to keep them from getting there. Now, is that the solution? Not necessarily, but what that does is it kicks the can down the road, hoping that in the interim, there's going to be some kind of pressure inside Iran that will either convince the Ayatollahs it's not worth the while to do it, or that there'll be some kind of regime change inside Iran. Remember, the Soviets, when they lasted from 1918 to 1990, the Ayatollahs came into power in 1979. They're probably not going to be there forever. So I think that's part of the game. America and Israel, they both don't want Iran to get the bomb. They just have different ways to go about trying to stop them. Biden wants to try diplomacy. Israel has no faith in diplomacy, but I do believe that Israel, they will continue to try to stop Iran from getting the bomb. Netanyahu, I mentioned this earlier. I said that Netanyahu, how can we get out of this logjam right now? One way to get out would be for Netanyahu to resign. Netanyahu is not going to resign. I covered Netanyahu very closely for 9 years. Netanyahu feels he's got this historical destiny that he's the prime minister to deal with the Iranian threat, that he's the only one out there. He's our Churchill. This is how he sees himself, right? He's our Churchill who is warning the world of the incoming storm clouds. And if the world does nothing to stop them, then he himself will do it. I think that's genuinely how he sees himself, which is why I don't think it's, he's not voluntarily going to step down.
Jenny, I'm going to let you close us out. It's just about 1 o'clock our time, 9 o'clock Herb's time. It's you and Yoni, so one of you gets to close us out.
As soon as you stop talking, I will close us out.
You know I can't stop talking.
So we're nearing the 1 o'clock hour. I wanted to thank all of you present today for this discussion and really allow Rabbi Yoni to give us some closing words of wisdom, because we have 2 minutes remaining, and give us a hint. Do we have any plans for next month's topic? This is me being funny because Rabbi Yoni doesn't like to do the topic until the day of. So
yeah, you know why.
I know why.
In
I know why.
Israel, everything changes like every day.
Every hour.
How can I know today what to talk about next month if we don't know if tomorrow we'll have a government or not? So let's wait until tomorrow at least. Maybe 2 weeks afterwards, maybe 3 months afterwards, maybe, who knows? But I think the only thing that I would like to finish with is the idea that we should hope that the person that will be the prime minister and all the ministers and all the Chavei Knesset, everyone that runs the government, will think first of all about how to lead the Jewish state and the Jewish nation and the Jewish people to a better place, and hope that they will think also about not only themselves, but I do believe that all the people that are running for the Knesset are all good people, and they're all coming from a very good source. And sometimes people need to maybe do small sacrifices or even big in order to help and support us, the citizens, and the entire Jewish nation.
Rabbi Yoni, thank you for allowing us to use your time spot to do an update with Herb. And just Herb, I just want to thank you again for being available, and look forward to more about the elections. And Jenny, thank you for facilitating this conversation. And to those that are on, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Erev Tov.
Gamlach.
ערב טוב, בהצלחה, תודה רבה.
תודה.
Thank you.